My name is Morgan Sterling, and I am 29 years old. To the 5 million people who follow the Sterling family on Instagram and TikTok, my parents and my younger sister, Bella, represent the pinnacle of modern success. They are a dynasty built on ring lights, sponsorship deals, and a carefully curated illusion of effortless glamour. But to the dark web, and to the thousands of automated bots constantly hammering against our digital perimeter, I am the only thing standing between my family and total annihilation. I am a certified information systems security professional, and for the last 5 years, I have served as the Chief Information Security Officer for the Sterling brand. While my family obsessed over lighting angles, viral trends, and follower counts, I lived my life in the shadows of the server room in the basement of our Hamptons estate. I spent 18 hours a day managing a military-grade digital fortress designed to protect them from their own staggering carelessness. I operated on a philosophy known in the industry as zero-trust architecture. This means that inside my network, no device, no user, and no connection is trusted by default, even if it comes from inside the house. Especially if it comes from inside the house. My daily routine was a silent war that my family never saw and certainly never appreciated. I mandated complex 40-character passwords that had to be changed every 30 days, a policy that my mother complained about constantly because she could never remember them. I required physical hardware keys for multi-factor authentication on every single account, from their high-stakes banking apps to their trivial social media logins. I actively monitored and blocked thousands of spear phishing attempts and brute force attacks every single month. These were sophisticated threats designed to steal their identities, drain their accounts, and hold their reputations for ransom. I neutralized them in silence, often while my family ate dinner upstairs, completely oblivious to the digital bullets I was catching for them. To them, I was not a protector or a professional. I was a nuisance. I was the buzzkill sister who ruined their spontaneous fun by making them log in twice or forbidding them from connecting to unsecured public wireless networks at luxury hotels. My father, Richard, often joked to his business partners that I was paranoid, treating my rigorous security protocols as a quirky, annoying personality flaw rather than a necessary survival strategy. My sister Bella, the golden child of the influencer world, was the most vocal critic. She constantly whined that my firewalls created latency, slowing down her live streams by mere milliseconds and making it too difficult for her to engage with her fans in real time. They viewed security as a hurdle to their fame, an obstacle I had placed in their path out of jealousy or rigidity. They didn't understand that their fame made them targets. They saw the internet as a stage for adoration. I saw it as a threat landscape, filled with predators, looking for a single, unlocked door. I was the invisible firewall, the unthanked guard at the gate, absorbing their insults while keeping their digital empire from crumbling into dust. They called me the IT girl with a sneer, never realizing that without me, their entire lives were just one click away from being deleted. They thought they wanted freedom from my rules, but they had no idea that the only reason they were free to live their lavish, public lives was because I was chained to the console, holding the line. The collapse of the Sterling Empire began on a humid Tuesday evening during our weekly family production meeting. We gathered in the living room, a space that looked less like a home and more like a television studio, cluttered with ring lights, boom microphones, and tripods. My father, Richard, sat at the head of the mahogany table, checking his analytics on a tablet. My mother was busy adjusting her makeup in a compact mirror, while Bella sat to my right, actively live-streaming her dinner of kale salad to 200,000 strangers, whispering to her phone as if we weren't even there. I had requested this meeting to discuss a critical security patch for our integrated home automation system. A new vulnerability had been discovered in the firmware of our smart locks, and I needed 20 minutes of network downtime to install the fix. But before I could even open my laptop or explain the risk of a remote override, my father raised his hand to silence me. He didn't look up from his screen. He simply stated, in a tone usually reserved for dismissing a caterer, that my services were no longer required. He explained that after a strategic review of their brand growth, they had decided to hire a new, trendy public relations firm called Flash Hype to manage the family's entire digital presence. According to my father, The representatives from Flash Hype, a group of 20-somethings who worked out of a loft in Brooklyn, had promised to optimize our workflow. They claimed that my rigorous security protocols were creating too much latency, slowing down their upload speeds by mere milliseconds and creating friction in their content creation process. They called my methods paranoid, draconian, and outdated. My mother chimed in, finally looking up from her mirror to tell me that I was stifling Bella's creativity. She complained that my constant demands for two-factor authentication and complex passwords were killing the vibe and making it too difficult for Bella to engage with her fans spontaneously. They didn't want safety. They wanted speed. They wanted seamless, instant connectivity. They wanted a world without barriers, where they could broadcast their lives without having to type in a 6-digit code or wait for a secure tunnel to establish. When I tried to explain that removing the firewalls to increase internet speed was the digital equivalent of removing the front door of our house just to let the breeze in, they laughed. It was a dismissive, pitying sound. My father looked me in the eye and said that the brand needed someone who understood vitality and viral velocity, not someone obsessed with doom and gloom. He told me to hand over my administrative credentials immediately. As I stared at them, I realized with a sinking heart that they weren't just firing their chief information security officer. They were deleting the only safety net they had, effectively handing the keys to their digital kingdom to a pack of wolves disguised as marketing gurus. I did not argue. In the high-stakes world of cybersecurity, we learn a fundamental truth very early in our careers. You cannot force a client to accept protection they do not want, even if that client is your own flesh and blood. Arguing with a client who has already decided to jump off a digital cliff is a waste of bandwidth. I stood up from the mahogany table and initiated the formal offboarding protocol. I did not act out of malice. I acted with the cold, professional precision of a surgeon closing a wound. I opened my secure briefcase and withdrew the physical hardware tokens that authenticated access to the family's digital life. I handed over the master administrative passwords, complex, 40-character strings that I had memorized but never written down, to the lead representative from Flash Hype. He was a young man in his early 20s, wearing a vintage graphic tee and ripped jeans, looking more like a festival DJ than a systems administrator. When I handed him the ledger and mentioned the critical importance of rotating the encryption keys every 7 days, he actually rolled his eyes at me. He muttered something about legacy thinking and tossed the secure tokens into his backpack as if they were packs of gum. I continued the process methodically. I removed my biometric data from the server room scanners, deleting my fingerprints and retinal scans from the system I built. I wiped my personal device of all family data, ensuring a clean, irreversible break. But before I walked out the door, I felt a professional obligation to offer one final advisory. I looked directly at the Flash Hype representative, ignoring my father's impatient glare. "Listen to me carefully," I said, my voice steady. "You must keep the smart home network physically isolated from the broadcasting server. The Internet of Things devices in this house, the smart refrigerators, the wireless thermostats, and the security cameras are notoriously insecure. They have weak firmware vulnerabilities. If you bridge them to the main network to boost signal strength, you are essentially creating an unlocked backdoor for every hacker on the planet." The representative laughed, a dismissive sound that echoed in the silent room. He told me to relax and claimed that they used cloud magic to handle all security protocols, a phrase that was technically meaningless but sounded expensive enough to impress my parents. My family smirked at each other, treating my urgent security warning as the final, desperate gasp of a jealous sister trying to stay relevant. My father waved his hand, dismissing me. I packed my equipment and left the estate that night without looking back. I moved into a quiet, nondescript apartment downtown with robust physical security. Within a week, I launched my own private consultancy, Aegis Security, catering to politicians and executives who actually understood that privacy was a luxury worth paying for. For 6 months, I thrived in the silence of my new life, but I never stopped watching. I monitored the Sterling family from a distance, watching their digital footprint expand recklessly, stripping away the armor I had built layer by layer, waiting for the inevitable breach that I knew was coming. 6 months after I walked out of my childhood home, the silence was broken by a media blitz that was impossible to ignore. My family announced the single biggest event in the history of their brand, Bella's royal wedding. It was pitched not merely as a ceremony, but as a revolutionary content strategy designed to break the internet. They planned to livestream the entire weekend, broadcasting 24 hours a day from every single room in our Hamptons estate. They promised their fans unprecedented intimacy and access, branding it as the world's first zero-latency interactive wedding. Millions of viewers were expected to tune in, commenting in real time and voting on everything from the lighting to the music. To achieve this technical feat, the geniuses at Flash Hype made a catastrophic architectural decision that would have been laughable if it weren't so dangerous. In their desperate bid to ensure high-definition streaming without a millisecond of buffering, they completely dismantled the network segmentation I had spent years maintaining. They argued that my firewalls and encryption protocols were causing packet loss and lag, so they simply disabled them. They prioritized speed over safety, stripping away the digital armor to facilitate a smoother video feed. Worse, in order to simplify the infrastructure, they connected every single electronic device in the house onto a single, flat network backbone. The high-definition cameras, the stage lighting rigs, the smart locks on the exterior doors, and the unsecured guest wireless network were all sharing the exact same bandwidth. They had effectively opened a digital superhighway directly into the heart of the family's private life, with no toll booths and no guards. From the safety of my office at Aegis Security, I watched the pre-show coverage on my monitors. I wasn't looking at the floral arrangements or the dress rehearsals. I was looking at the network specifications they arrogantly boasted about in their technical press releases. I ran a passive scan on their public IP address and felt a chill go down my spine. I saw open ports that should have been welded shut. I saw a complete lack of encryption on the data streams. They had built a magnificent stage for a wedding, but architecturally, they had constructed a playground for hackers. I knew then that it was not a matter of if they would be attacked, but exactly when the strike would land. I sat in my ergonomic chair, sipping black coffee, and watched the subscriber count on their channel tick upward, knowing that every new viewer was a potential threat vector they had absolutely no way to stop. The digital assassination of the Sterling brand did not begin with a dramatic explosion or a skull flashing on a screen. It began silently, exactly 20 minutes into the ceremony. While my sister Bella stood at the altar in a custom lace gown, looking radiant for the high-definition cameras, a hacker group located halfway across the world began to scan the estate's public internet protocol address. In the past, my security protocols would have automatically geo-blocked any connection request coming from outside our approved zones, effectively making the house invisible to foreign threats. But because Flash Hype had removed those blocks to maximize their international viewer count, the hackers faced absolutely no resistance. They did not need to crack a complex code. They simply rattled the digital doorknobs until they found one that was unlocked. The entry point they found was not a computer, a smartphone, or even the main router. It was a single smart light bulb screwed into a hallway lamp. Flash Hype had installed these cheap, internet-connected devices just hours before the event to create mood lighting for the reception area. The bulb had a known firmware vulnerability, a security flaw in its code that the manufacturer had released a patch for months ago. Had I been in charge, that device would have been updated or thrown in the trash. But the new team had ignored the update notifications, prioritizing aesthetics over hygiene. The hackers compromised the bulb in less than 4 seconds. In a properly secured network, this would have been a minor annoyance. The bulb would be isolated on a separate guest network, unable to talk to anything else. But because Flash Hype had dismantled my network segmentation to prevent lag, the infected light bulb was on the exact same network as the main server. The hackers used that tiny, $5 foothold to pivot laterally into the heart of the system. It was a textbook escalation of privileges. Within seconds, they moved from the light bulb to the central hub, and then to the primary server. They bypassed the weak user permissions and escalated their status from guest to administrator. They didn't just want to watch the wedding, they wanted to direct it. From my office miles away, I watched the data traffic spike on my external monitoring tools. I still monitored the public traffic patterns out of professional habit. I saw the upload speeds hit critical mass. I realized with a sick feeling in my stomach that the volume of data leaving the house was far too large to just be video streams. They weren't just broadcasting the ceremony out to the world. They were exfiltrating terabytes of private data from the family's unencrypted hard drives. The wedding was still happening in the physical world, but in the digital world, the house had already been looted. The moment of impact was timed with a cruelty that could only have been premeditated. The ceremony had reached its emotional peak. The officiant, a celebrity pastor with a perfect smile, raised his hands and asked the congregation if anyone had just cause to object to the union. In a traditional wedding, this is a rhetorical question met with silence. In the Sterling household, it was the cue for a digital execution. Before a single guest could breathe, the massive LED screens towering behind the altar screens that were currently displaying a slow-motion montage of Bella and her fiancé running on a beach flickered violently. The romantic music cut out with a screech of audio feedback that made the guests in the front row cover their ears. Then, the screens went black. The darkness lasted for 3 agonizing seconds, just long enough for the confusion to set in. Then, a bright, blood-red countdown clock appeared, ticking down from 5 minutes. A jarring, synthesized voice boomed through the stadium-quality speakers, overriding the microphone system. "We object," the voice announced, distorted and mocking. A ransom note scrolled across the screens in jagged, neon text, but this was not a standard financial ransom. These hackers weren't asking for Bitcoin or a wire transfer. They were bored, they were malicious, and they were entertaining themselves by burning a dynasty to the ground. The broadcasting of the family's private data began immediately, beamed live to the 5 million people watching the stream. The first wave was social. The screens displayed high-resolution screenshots of my mother's unedited group chat. The guests gasped as they read messages sent just hours ago, where my mother insulted her biggest sponsors, calling their products cheap trash, and referred to her loyal fanbase as mindless sheep who will buy anything I tell them to. Then came the financial ruin. The feed switched to raw PDF documents from my father's private server. It showed that the Sterling Charity Foundation, which they claimed built schools in developing nations, was actually a tax evasion scheme used to purchase the very yacht they were currently honeymooning on. The chaos in the ballroom was absolute. Guests were screaming. The groom pulled his hand away from Bella as if she were contagious, and Bella stood frozen at the altar, sobbing as her secrets scrolled behind her in 40-foot-high letters. But the hackers were not done. They decided to turn the venue into a cage. They activated a dormant ransomware protocol embedded in the smart home controller. A loud, mechanical thud echoed through the room as every electronic lock in the estate engaged simultaneously. The heavy exit doors sealed shut. The window shutters slammed down. 200 of the world's most influential people were suddenly trapped inside a venue that was broadcasting their panic to the globe. It was a digital siege. In the corner, the geniuses from Flash Hype stood pale and trembling, frantically tapping on their phones, realizing too late that they had no keys, no access, and absolutely no power to stop the monster they had let in. My phone rang at exactly 4:12 p.m. I was sitting in my ergonomic chair at the Aegis Security Command Center, watching the disaster unfold on 3 different monitors. The caller ID flashed a name I hadn't spoken to in 6 months. Dad. I didn't answer immediately. I let it ring. 1, 2, 3. I needed the panic to fully set in. I needed him to understand, in the visceral silence between rings, that he was no longer the person in charge. When I finally swiped the green icon, the voice on the other end was unrecognizable. The booming, arrogant baritone of Richard Sterling, the man who had dismissed me as a buzzkill and a nuisance, was gone. In its place was the sheer, trembling terror of a man watching his entire legacy incinerate in real time. He was hyperventilating, the background noise of screaming guests and blaring alarms bleeding through the line. "Morgan," he choked out, his voice cracking. "You have to help us." They locked the doors. "We can't get out." The screens. They are showing everything. The tax returns, the emails. They just threatened to release Bella's private medical records next. "I thought you had a new team for this," I said, my voice calm, contrasting sharply with his hysteria. "What does Flash Hype say?" "They are useless," he screamed, abandoning all loyalty to his new hires. "They are locked out. They said the encryption is too strong. The police are outside, but they can't breach the digital lock without physically breaking down the doors. And the hackers said if we try to cut the power, they will dump the entire database to the dark web. Morgan, please. You built this system. You are the only one who knows how to stop it. I leaned back in my chair. I did build it, I agreed. And then you fired me. I am not your daughter right now, Richard. I am the CEO of Aegis Security. You are asking for a level 5 incident response service from an external consultant. I didn't wait for him to argue. I tapped a key on my keyboard and sent a secure document to his phone. I just sent you a contract. It is a standard emergency retainer. The fee is $500,000, payable immediately via wire transfer. Additionally, there is a clause on page 2 granting Aegis Security, meaning me, absolute unchecked authority over the Sterling family's digital infrastructure for the next 5 years. Total control. No arguments, no optimizations from marketing teams. 500,000? He gasped. Morgan, that is extortion. No. I corrected him coldly. That is the market rate for saving your life. You have 30 seconds before I hang up and let them publish Bella's medical history. I heard a beep on the line. He didn't read the contract. He didn't negotiate. I heard the desperation in his breathing as he authenticated the transfer with his Face ID. A moment later, a notification pinged on my screen. Payment received. $500,000. He wasn't paying for a daughter's love. He was paying for the competence he had mocked for years. Once the transfer hit my account, I swiveled my chair to my main console. I didn't need to drive to the estate. I didn't need to hack the hackers. 3 years ago, when I wired the house, I had installed a hardwired emergency access port, a physical backdoor hidden behind a false panel in the server room wall. It was an air-gapped line that bypassed the main network entirely, designed for exactly this kind of catastrophic failure. The geniuses at FlashHype had failed to find it because they never bothered to audit the physical wiring. They were looking at the cloud. I was looking at the copper. I typed in a 64-character encryption key that only I possessed, and for the first time in 6 months, the system welcomed me home. I did not try to hack back the attackers. That is a Hollywood myth that is both illegal and tactically ineffective. Engaging a hostile actor in a digital fistfight while they are already inside your perimeter is a losing game. Instead, I executed a textbook containment strategy known in the industry as severing the head. Sitting in the quiet hum of my office, miles away from the chaos, I used my re-established root access to bypass the compromised local router entirely. I went straight to the service provider level and executed a command I had scripted years ago for this exact doomsday scenario. I killed the connection between the Sterling estate and the public internet. The effect was instantaneous. On my monitors, the data spike flatlined. In the ballroom, the live stream went dark instantly, ending the public broadcast of my family's humiliation before the hackers could upload the medical records. The massive LED screens behind the altar, which had been flashing the ransom demands, turned into black, lifeless monoliths. The room was plunged into a sudden, stunned silence, broken only by the sobbing of the bride. But I wasn't finished. Cutting the internet was only the tourniquet. I needed to remove the shrapnel. Next, I activated the physical isolation protocols I had installed 3 years prior, safeguards that the FlashHype team hadn't even known existed because they never looked at the building schematics. I accessed the smart home's power management grid and remotely tripped the specific circuit breakers dedicated to the IoT hub. It was a digital amputation. The infected smart light bulb in the hallway, the high-definition cameras, and the compromised main server all powered down with a mechanical clunk. By killing the power to the infected nodes, I froze the malware in place. With the hostile connection severed and the hardware dead, the ransomware could no longer receive commands from the hackers. The brain of the attack was dead, even if the body was still in the house. Finally, I turned my attention to the doors. The electronic locks were still engaged, holding 200 panicked guests hostage. Because the system was now offline, I couldn't unlock them through the cloud app. I had to use a hard override. I opened a terminal window and typed in a local override code, a complex sequence of binary I had memorized and never written down, specifically designed to reboot the door locking mechanism into safety mode in the event of a total system failure. I hit enter. Through the audio feed of the internal security system, which operated on a separate closed circuit, I heard the heavy, mechanical thud of 20 deadbolts retracting simultaneously. The doors clicked open. Fresh air rushed into the stifling ballroom. The guests didn't wait for permission. They pushed the doors open and fled into the gardens, escaping the digital cage. In less than 4 minutes, I had neutralized a catastrophic threat that an expensive PR firm had spent an hour panicking over. I didn't do it with magic or cloud wizardry. I did it with architecture and foresight. I routed power back to the internal lights to stop the panic, but I kept the internet dark. The wedding was officially over, but the forensic investigation into how this happened was just beginning. An hour after I unlocked the doors, the atmosphere in the ballroom had shifted from panic to a hollow, echoing desolation. The guests had fled the moment the magnetic locks disengaged, leaving behind overturned chairs, shattered champagne flutes, and the ruins of a party that had cost $500,000. My family remained huddled together on the stage, looking disheveled and small against the backdrop of the massive, dark LED screens. They looked like survivors of a natural disaster, trembling in their couture outfits. I did not go to the estate. I didn't need to. I established a secure, closed-circuit local connection to the ballroom's audio-visual system. Suddenly, the massive screens behind them flickered to life. My face appeared, 10 feet tall, looking down at them from the command center of Aegis Security. My father, Richard, looked up at the screen. His eyes were red, and his face was streaked with tears. Upon seeing me, he tried to salvage the moment. He stepped toward the camera, clasping his hands together in a performance of gratitude that made my stomach turn. He thanked me for saving them, but then, true to his nature, he immediately tried to spin the narrative. He began to rant about the sophisticated cybercriminals and the state-sponsored hackers who had targeted them, trying to frame the family as victims of a genius supervillain who had simply outsmarted everyone. "Stop," I said. My voice was crisp, amplified by the stadium-quality speakers, cutting through his excuses like a blade. There was no supervillain, Dad, and there was no sophisticated attack. I minimized my video feed and shared my screen, projecting the raw server logs for them to see. Lines of code and timestamps scrolled down the wall behind them, illuminating their terrified faces in a harsh, blue light. "This did not happen because of a mastermind," I told them, my voice devoid of emotion. "This happened because of negligence." I highlighted a line of code in neon yellow. The hackers did not break through my encryption. They entered through a smart lightbulb in the hallway that hadn't been updated in 6 months. It was a known vulnerability that Flash Hype ignored. My father opened his mouth to argue, but I scrolled down. Once they were inside, they should have been trapped in that bulb's local network. But they weren't. They accessed the main server because someone disabled the internal firewalls to make the video stream faster. I pulled up the user modification logs, and finally, the reason they were able to decrypt and broadcast your private financial files is right here. I zoomed in on the password field for the master administrator account, which had been modified 24 hours prior. The text was visible in plain sight. It read, "BellaWedding2024. A gasp echoed through the empty room. Bella covered her mouth with her hand. "You fired me for being paranoid," I said, my voice echoing off the walls. "You told me my security was too difficult. So you replaced military-grade encryption with a password a toddler could guess. You prioritized convenience over survival. This disaster is not a tragedy, Richard. It is a direct consequence of your own vanity." The silence that followed was absolute, the weight of their own stupidity finally crushing the ego they had tried so hard to protect. The aftermath of the wedding was a total, irreversible reconfiguration of power within the Sterling family. The reputational damage from the leaked group chats and the financial documents was severe. Within 48 hours, the brand my parents had spent 30 years building was effectively radioactive. They lost millions in sponsorships, their reality show was put on indefinite hiatus, and my father was facing multiple audits from the tax authorities based on the documents the hackers had broadcast. The Sterling Empire was in ruins, a digital smoking crater caused by their own arrogance. However, I kept my word. I drove to the bank and retrieved my backups, military-grade cold storage drives I had kept in a physical safety deposit box, completely air-gapped from the internet, which neither the hackers nor the incompetent team at Flash Hype could touch. With surgical precision, I restored their critical data, secured their bank accounts, and scrubbed the compromised malware from their devices. I saved them, just as I said I would. But the dynamic of our relationship had shifted permanently. I was no longer the IT girl they mocked, nor was I the help they fired for being a buzzkill. I was now the landlord of their digital lives. Under the strict terms of the contract my father had signed in his panic, I initiated a digital conservatorship. Every tweet, every email, every photo, and every live stream they wanted to post now had to be routed through my secure servers for manual approval. I controlled the bandwidth. I controlled the passwords. I controlled the access. My father tried to argue a week later, once the initial terror had faded. He called me, his voice regaining some of its old bluster, claiming that the terms were draconian and that I was being unreasonable. He wanted his administrative rights back. I didn't argue. I simply reminded him that I still possessed the rest of the server logs, the unreleased data, proving that his negligence, not a sophisticated cyber attack, was the cause of the breach. I told him that if he breached our contract, the world would see exactly who left the digital backdoor open. He went silent immediately. I realized then that for 29 years, I had been trying to encrypt a connection that was never secure. I had wanted their love, but I was looking for it in people who only valued utility. I realized that I didn't need their approval or their affection. I needed respect, and since they wouldn't give it freely, I had engineered a situation where they had no choice but to offer it. They live in my world now, behind the walls I built, safe only because I allow them to be. My name is Morgan Sterling, CEO of Aegis Security. I used to be the daughter they tried to delete. Now, for the first time in my life, I hold the encryption keys. If you are watching this, and you have ever been punished for being the responsible one, or told that your boundaries were paranoia, I want you to remember this. Competence is the only currency that matters when the system crashes. Do not let anyone dismantle your firewalls just to make them feel comfortable. Your worth is not determined by the people who cannot afford your security. Thank you for listening to my story. If you believe that respect should be non-negotiable, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice and resilience. And tell me in the comments, what is a boundary you set that saved you? I'll be reading your stories.